Your government drugged innocent people without their knowledge, tested mind control on children, performed experiments on prisoners, mental patients, and soldiers, none of whom gave their consent, then destroyed the evidence. And the man who ran the entire program never spent a single day in prison. This was not a conspiracy theory. This was not a movie. This was a real, officially confirmed CIA program that ran for over 20 years, from 1953 to 1973. It was called MK Ultra. And the only reason you know about it right now, the only reason any of us know about it, is because a secretary made a mistake. She filed the documents in the wrong room. And when the CIA came to destroy the evidence, they missed them. Every other document was burned. What you are about to hear is what survived the fire. So let's begin. The world after World War II, 1945, the fear that started everything. To understand why MK Ultra happened, you have to understand the world that created it. It is 1945. World War II has just ended. America has won. But the relief of victory lasts approximately 5 minutes before a new fear takes its place. The Soviet Union. The Cold War is beginning, and it is unlike any war America has ever fought, because the enemy is invisible. There are no beaches to storm, no cities to liberate. The battlefield is ideology, influence, psychology. And then the reports start coming in. American prisoners of war returning from Korea are behaving strangely. They are making public statements that sound rehearsed, confessing to crimes they did not commit, praising the communist system that imprisoned them. The CIA calls it brainwashing, and they are terrified. Because if the Soviets have found a way to control the human mind, to make a man say things he doesn't believe, confess to things he didn't do, betray everything he was trained to protect, then no secret is safe. No soldier can be trusted. No intelligence operative is reliable. The CIA begins asking a question that will haunt the next 2 decades. Can we do it too? Can we find a way to control the human mind? The answer, they decide, is that they have to try. In April 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles officially authorizes a new program. He gives it a name, MK Ultra. The man behind the program, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Every horror story has an architect. MK Ultra had Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb was a chemist, born in the Bronx, New York in 1918. He had a PhD from Caltech. He had a club foot that kept him out of World War II. He raised goats on a farm in Virginia. He folk danced in his spare time. He was also, by any reasonable measure, one of the most dangerous men in American history. Gottlieb became the head of the CIA's chemical division and the chief architect of MK Ultra. He was the man who decided what experiments would be run, on whom, and using what methods. His central obsession was LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, a powerful hallucinogenic drug that had been discovered in 1943 by a Swiss chemist named Albert Hofmann. LSD produced profound alterations in perception, thought, and consciousness. Gottlieb believed it could be the key to mind control. If you could dose someone with LSD without their knowledge, if you could break down their mental defenses, make them suggestible, compliant, confused, maybe you could make them say anything, do anything, believe anything. There was one small problem with this theory. It was completely untested on human beings. Gottlieb's solution to this problem was not to proceed carefully. It was to test it on everyone he could find. Operation Paperclip and the Science of Suffering. The methods begin. Before MK Ultra officially began, The CIA was already learning from the worst teachers imaginable. After World War II, the United States government ran a secret program called Operation Paperclip. Its purpose was to recruit Nazi scientists, men who had conducted horrific experiments on concentration camp prisoners, and bring them to America to work for the US government. The experiments these men had conducted, hypothermia studies, pressure experiments, infection studies, were crimes against humanity. The scientists who conducted them were war criminals. The United States recruited them anyway, because the knowledge they had, the data extracted from unspeakable suffering, was considered too valuable to ignore. This is the moral foundation on which MK Ultra was built. The idea that some knowledge is worth any cost, that some goals justify any method, that certain people, prisoners, mental patients, soldiers, the poor, the vulnerable, can be used as instruments without their consent. It is an idea with a very long and very dark history. And in 1953, the CIA decided to extend that history. The experiments begin. LSD, hypnosis, and the search for the perfect weapon. The MK Ultra experiments were not one program. They were a collection of at least 150 separate research projects conducted at over 80 institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons, and CIA safe houses across the United States and Canada. The subjects of these experiments fell into several categories. The first category, people who knew they were being studied. Military volunteers, CIA employees, people who signed up more or less to be test subjects. These were the lucky ones. The second category, people who had some idea something was happening but didn't know exactly what. Prisoners who were offered reduced sentences in exchange for participation. Mental patients who were told they were receiving new treatments. The third category, and this is the one that should make your blood run cold, people who had absolutely no idea. Operation Midnight Climax was one of the most disturbing sub-programs within MK Ultra. The CIA set up safe houses in San Francisco and New York City. They hired prostitutes to lure men back to these apartments. The men were given drinks secretly laced with LSD. CIA operatives watched through one-way mirrors and took notes. The men had no idea what was happening to them. They thought they were having a normal evening. Instead, they were unwitting test subjects in a government mind control experiment. This ran for years. In parallel, Gottlieb's team was experimenting with hypnosis. Could subjects be hypnotized to perform actions they would normally refuse? Sensory deprivation. What happened to the human mind when deprived of all input for extended periods? Electroconvulsive therapy. Could electric shocks alter personality or erase memory? Psychological torture. Isolation, sleep deprivation, constant noise, constant light. What broke a person down fastest? Each experiment generated data. Each data point was recorded in classified documents, and none of the subjects ever gave their informed consent. Frank Olson, the man who knew too much. In November 1953, a man named Frank Olson fell from a window on the 13th floor of the Statler Hotel in New York City. The official verdict was suicide. Frank Olson was a CIA scientist who had worked on biological weapons programs and had been present at MK Ultra experiments. 9 days before his death, he had attended a CIA retreat at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. At that retreat, Sidney Gottlieb secretly dosed the drinks of several CIA scientists, including Frank Olson, without telling any of them. Olson had a severe psychological reaction. He became paranoid, withdrawn, deeply distressed. He told colleagues he wanted to leave the CIA, that he had done things he was ashamed of. 9 days later, he was dead. For 22 years, Frank Olson's family was told he had jumped from the hotel window in a state of suicidal depression. In 1975, when MK Ultra was first exposed, the truth about the LSD dosing came out. President Ford personally apologized to the Olson family. They received a settlement of $750,000. But Frank Olson's son, Eric, was never satisfied. In 1994, Frank Olson's body was exhumed for a second autopsy. The forensic evidence suggested that the injuries were inconsistent with a fall. They were more consistent with someone being knocked unconscious before going through the window. Eric Olson has spent his entire adult life believing his father was murdered by the CIA to prevent him from talking. The case has never been officially reopened. Frank Olson was the most visible casualty of MK Ultra. He was almost certainly not the only one. Dr. Ewen Cameron, the monster in Montreal. If Sidney Gottlieb was the architect of MK Ultra, Dr. Ewen Cameron was its most enthusiastic contractor. Cameron was one of the most respected psychiatrists in the world. He was the first president of the World Psychiatric Association. He was president of the American Psychiatric Association. He was also conducting experiments on his patients at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, that can only be described as torture. Cameron believed he had found a way to cure mental illness by erasing a person's personality completely and building a new one from scratch. He called it psychic driving. The process worked like this. First, Cameron would put patients into drug-induced sleep for weeks or months at a time, sometimes longer. Patients would be kept unconscious for up to 86 days. During this time, they received massive doses of electroconvulsive therapy, electric shocks to the brain, far beyond any accepted medical dosage, up to 360 times the normal level. While they slept, recordings played on loop through speakers under their pillows or through helmets placed on their heads. The same messages repeated thousands of times. Cameron believed this would erase the old personality and allow a new, healthier one to be installed. What it actually did was destroy people's minds. Patients emerged from Cameron's treatment unable to remember their own names, unable to recognize their spouses or their children, unable to dress themselves, feed themselves, or speak coherently. They had been reduced, in many cases, to a state of permanent childlike helplessness. Some never recovered. The CIA funded Cameron's research through a series of front organizations, knowing exactly what he was doing. The patients at McGill University had come to a hospital seeking help for depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. They had no idea they were being used as subjects in a CIA mind control program. In 1988, 9 of Cameron's surviving patients and the families of others who had died sued the CIA and the Canadian government for what had been done to them. They received a settlement. Nobody went to prison. The children. The detail nobody talks about. I need to pause here and tell you something that is not discussed nearly enough in most accounts of MK Ultra. Some of the subjects were children. The Church Committee, the Senate committee that investigated MK Ultra in 1975, documented cases of experiments conducted on minors, orphans, children in state care, children whose parents had placed them in institutions, children who had no one to protect them. The details of what was done to these children are not fully known because the documents were destroyed. What we know comes from survivor testimony and the fragments that survived the 1973 document destruction. This is not a footnote. This is not a minor detail. Children were used as experimental subjects in a government mind control program, and the people responsible were never charged with anything. Take a moment with that. The documents are destroyed. 1973. By the early 1970s, MKUltra was winding down. The program had never achieved its central goal: reliable, controllable mind control. The human mind had proven more resistant than Gottlieb had hoped. LSD, it turned out, produced unpredictable results. Sometimes it made people suggestible. Sometimes it made them terrified. Sometimes it made them violent. Sometimes it gave them profound spiritual experiences that made them less compliant, not more. The dream of a chemical key to the human mind was fading. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files destroyed. Helms was about to leave his position. The Watergate scandal was consuming Washington. Congressional investigations were looming. The CIA was under scrutiny it had never faced before. The order was clear: destroy everything. Thousands of documents were shredded and burned. And almost everything was. Almost. A CIA employee, accounts differ on who exactly, had filed a set of MKUltra financial documents in a record center in Warrenton, Virginia. They were not with the main files. They were not on the destruction list. They survived. 2 years later, in 1975, a Freedom of Information request from journalist John Marks turned up those files. 20,000 documents. Enough to prove that MKUltra had existed. Enough to trace its funding and its structure. Not enough to know the full scope of what had been done. Because the full scope was in the files that burned. The Church Committee. America Finds Out. 1975 to 1977. In 1975, the United States Senate formed a special committee to investigate the CIA, the FBI, and American intelligence agencies. It was called the Church Committee, after its chairman, Senator Frank Church of Idaho. What the Church Committee found shocked the country. Assassination plots against foreign leaders, illegal domestic surveillance, programs to infiltrate and disrupt civil rights organizations, and MKUltra. The testimony was extraordinary. CIA officials admitted under oath that the program had existed, that American citizens had been drugged without their consent, that experiments were conducted on unwitting subjects. Sidney Gottlieb testified. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination on numerous questions. He retired from the CIA in 1972. He moved to a farm in Virginia. He went to India to work at a hospital for lepers. He wrote poetry. He died in 1999. He was never charged with any crime. The Church Committee's findings led to significant reforms in how American intelligence agencies operated. New oversight mechanisms were created. New rules about human experimentation were established. But for the victims of MKUltra, the people who had been drugged, tortured, and psychologically destroyed, the reforms came too late. Most never received full acknowledgement of what had been done to them. Most never received compensation. Many had died. And because the documents were destroyed, most could never fully prove what they had experienced. What we still don't know. The darkness beyond the documents. Here is the thing about MKUltra that keeps researchers and investigators awake at night. The documents that survived, The 20,000 files found in Warrenton, Virginia, represent only the financial records. They tell us how much money was spent and on what projects and at which institutions. They do not tell us what actually happened in those rooms, what was done to those people, what they experienced, what the long-term consequences were. The actual experimental records, the notes, the observations, the outcomes, the data, those were in the files that burned. We know MKUltra ran for 20 years. We know it operated at over 80 institutions. We know it involved at least 150 separate research projects. We do not know how many people were subjected to experiments. Estimates range from hundreds to tens of thousands. We do not know how many people were permanently damaged. We do not know how many people died. We know about Frank Olson. We suspect there were others. We will never know their names, because the evidence burned in 1973 on the orders of a CIA director who faced no consequences for that order. This is not ancient history. Richard Helms, who ordered the destruction of the files, died in 2002. Sidney Gottlieb, who designed and ran the experiments, died in 1999. These men lived full, long lives. The people they experimented on, the ones who survived, are still out there, still living with what was done to them, still trying to get answers that the destroyed files can never provide. The legacy of MKUltra, what it means today. MKUltra officially ended in 1973, but its legacy is everywhere. Every piece of legislation governing medical research ethics in the United States, every rule about informed consent, about the rights of research subjects, about the protection of vulnerable populations, exists in part because of MKUltra. The Belmont Report, which established the ethical principles governing human research in America, was published in 1979, 4 years after MKUltra was exposed. Not a coincidence. The program also established something darker, a template. A template for what happens when an institution decides that its goals are important enough to override the rights of individuals. When security or national interest or scientific progress becomes a justification for treating human beings as instruments. MKUltra was not the first time this happened in American history. It will not be the last. The question it forces us to ask, the question that still doesn't have a comfortable answer, is how do we make sure we know when it's happening again? Because MKUltra ran for 20 years in hospitals, universities, CIA safe houses, funded by the federal government, overseen by senior officials, and almost nobody knew. The end. What remains? We started this story with a question. Can you control the human mind? The CIA spent 20 years and millions of dollars trying to answer that question. They drugged people, they shocked them, they isolated them, they kept them unconscious for months. They used them, discarded them, and then tried to burn the evidence. And what did they find? That the human mind cannot be reliably controlled, that consciousness resists, that identity persists even under extreme assault, that what makes us human, the stubborn, complicated, unpredictable thing that we are, is harder to break than they thought. This is cold comfort to the people who were broken in the attempt. To Frank Olson, who fell from a 13th floor window with unanswered questions that his son is still asking 50 years later. To the patients at McGill University who went looking for help and came out not knowing their own names. To the children, the ones we cannot name because the records were burned, who deserved protection and received the opposite. To all of them, their suffering was real, their stories matter, and the people who did this to them never faced justice. That is the true legacy of MKUltra. Not the science, not the Cold War strategy, not the policy reforms that followed. The legacy are the people who were used. And the question that remains, that will always remain, how many others are there that we will never know about?
If this story stayed with you, if you feel that weight sitting in your chest right now, subscribe to Lost Chronicles, because the stories that were supposed to stay buried, we are going to find them. Leave a comment. What's the most shocking thing you learned today? I'll see you in the next one.